War Beneath the Roots is a fantasy fiction podcast set in a world I created as a dungeon master, brought to life by characters I played across separate D&D campaigns. While rooted in tabletop storytelling, this is a fully written narrative crafted for audio. Video versions are available to enhance the experience with maps and art, but they're not necessary. This podcast contains violence and themes that may not be suitable for all audiences. It was supposed to be a pilgrimage. They sent her west, to the central landmass, where the wild lands still breathed, where the old trees bent low with wisdom, and rivers sang songs from before there were names for things, where no nation's banner flew, and few cities dared cut the earth. She kept moving westward, toward a stretch of wild where the enemy troops of Midborg had recently made landfall. A deep wood grove said to have survived the axes of men and fires of Midborg alike. But when she arrived, the trees did not sway. The birds did not sing. No wind moved, no insects, no decay. No life. She knelt in the loam and placed her hand to the roots, and they wept. Not with water, but with something thicker. A black, fungal sludge pulsing from beneath. Sticky with warmth, like fresh blood. Her breath caught. Her communion faltered. The weave rippled. The ground shifted. Beneath her palm, the tree's roots twitched. She pulled away. The bark stuck to her, not cracked, not broken, peeled, revealing soft black flesh beneath, a velvet fungus pulsing faintly with breath. A ring of fungus bloomed around her, grew around her, too fast, too eager. And then she heard it. Not with her ears, with her marrow. A sound like wind through a hollowed skull. A whisper so ancient it had no tongue to shape it. Closer. She ran. 3 days, no food. No sleep. She burned her journal and her clothes. She cut the growth that bloomed from her arm where it had kissed her skin. She left the blade. When she returned to the outpost, she could only speak the words, "It's here." The commander assumed she meant Midborg, and he was wrong. I am Benjamin Harris. Welcome to War Beneath the Roots. Chapter 1. Markin Treefoot knelt in the mud, knuckles pale where he gripped his bow, trying to steady the tremble that had infected his body since the morning. The overcast sky bled a cold, indifferent light across the clearing. His breath fogged, shallow and quick, the taste of salt sharp in his mouth. Ahead, the crumbling ruin of an old watchtower slouched against the horizon, its broken stones jagged like rotten teeth. They'd made camp just a few miles outside Kita's walls last night. Markin, Aldrich, and Eliza, novices with Kita's Adventurers Guild, promoted due to a lack of options with the veterans away at war with Midborg. Citizenship in Kita would mean a steady income for Markin's mother and sister, currently living in the tent city beyond the gates. Proving your worth to the city council was the path to citizenship. This hobgoblin raid was their first real contract. Stop them from ambushing the merchant routes, collecting their fee, and edging one step closer to Kita's council chamber. He had overheard the two strangers, the monstrous minotaur called Blue and the impossible root man, murmuring by the fire, though murmuring was generous. Blue spoke in a deep gravel rumble that matched his form, towering, broad as a cart, with curling horns marked with blue vein-shaped markings, and thick, slate-gray skin marred by old scars. His eyes glowered faintly with an inner fire like banked coals. The creature of branches, who they'd come to call Beam, said nothing at all. He barely moved, a silent sentinel wrapped in gnarled bark and twisted vines, his body more tree than man. One of his arms looked petrified, part fungus and part root, pulsing softly with bioluminescent veins. He wore armor that looked to be made of stone, perhaps for protection, perhaps to conceal himself. Beam's spores had filled the air like an unseen mist, and emotions, regret, anger, longing, whispered into Markin's mind without words. Markin wondered why Beam and Blue had approached their camp. Blue the Minotaur had mentioned something about a dragon, about slavery, about vengeance. Markin hadn't pressed for more. He didn't need another tangle of mysteries. He needed coin, standing, and survival. Nothing else. Now crouched in the muck with his two guildmates, Aldrich and Eliza, Markin wondered if he'd live long enough to regret that decision. The hobgoblins had dug in around the watchtower, a score of armored shapes prowling the perimeter. Their crude armor was rusted but serviceable. Their weapons, jagged and blackened, looked stolen from a dozen different fields of battle. Markin pulled an arrow from his quiver. His fingers slipped on the shaft. He wiped them on his tunic, leaving streaks of grime. "Ready?" Aldrich hissed beside him. Markin swallowed. It felt like swallowing broken glass. "No." Eliza gave a sharp, humorless smile. "Good. Means you won't do anything stupid." She rose, quick and low, and knocked her own arrow. Aldrich followed, shield lifted. Markin moved with them, heart hammering. The plan was simple. Distract the sentries, draw them out. Beam and Blue would handle the rest. Simple plans were the first to fail. Aldrich's war cry split the gray air, and the three of them rushed the clearing's edge. Arrows sang. Markin's first shot buried itself in a hobgoblin's throat, the creature collapsing with a wet gurgle. He barely had time to celebrate before the air turned to chaos. The clash of steel, the shriek of dying men. It happened so fast, Markin almost missed it. As Beam slammed the ground with his staff, the ground heaved and split, thick roots lashing upward, catching a charging hobgoblin mid-stride. Bones cracked with a wet pop as Beam's grasp crushed the life from it. Another root whipped sideways, yanking a second foe off his feet and slamming him into a jagged stump hard enough to snap his spine. Markin fired again and again, but they kept coming. He barely registered the blurred motion as Blue hurled past him, an avalanche of fur and horn. The Minotaur's axe, a slab of iron the size of a wagon door, cleaved two hobgoblins in half with a single roar and swing. Their blood sprayed in a fine mist, the air choking with the stink of copper and bile. Markin turned just in time to see Aldrich go down. A blade punched through Aldrich's gut with a sound like tearing cloth. The man's mouth opened in a silent scream, blood bubbling from his lips. Eliza screamed, lunging to reach him, but three more hobgoblins crashed into her, dragging her down under a tide of snarling rage. Markin froze. The world narrowed to a pinprick. His fingers forgot the bow. His legs forgot to move. It was Beam who saved him. The air thickened, and a warm, fungal scent filled Markin's nose as spores flooded the clearing. They brushed against his mind. Urgency. Grief. the cold inevitability of death. Beam's roots tore the ground open like a wound. Hobgoblins screamed as they were dragged underground, their screams muffled by the earth. Blue carved through the battlefield like a storm-given flesh. His axe never slowed, only rose and fell in a brutal rhythm. Each impact, another body broken, another spray of gore slicking the stones. Markin staggered backward, bile rising again in his throat. He tripped over something soft and wet. Aldrich's body. The man's eyes were wide, glassy. His mouth worked soundlessly, the last of his life leaking from the ragged hole in his belly. I'm sorry, Markin whispered, useless words spilling into the ruin. Something cracked the air behind him. A smell like burning sulfur flooded Markin's nose. He turned, bow half raised. Atop the hill overlooking the watchtower, a tear in the world opened. A ragged spiral of golden light spinning backward, the edges fraying like burning parchment. From it stumbled a figure, wrapped in a battered cloak, one boot catching on the uneven ground as he tumbled out of the portal. The stranger's eyes were wrong, shot through with threads of gold, spinning slowly like clockwork. Strange, broken clock hands formed around his fists and unwound backward through the air. Hobgoblins clutched their heads, screaming, as time itself seemed to bend and knot around them. "Don't worry," the man shouted, voice reedy but cheerful. "I'm fairly certain this is the right hill." Blue gored the last standing hobgoblin through the chest with a roar, lifting the corpse high before casting it aside. Silence fell. They all stared at the stranger. Only the wet drip of blood from Beam's roots and the labored, rattled breath of the dying remained. Markin stood rooted, unable to move, unable to speak. His bow hung limp in his hand. The weight of it, once familiar, now felt alien and cold. The stranger, the old man of twisting clock magic, hopped down the hill, landing with an ungainly thump. He stumbled, righted himself with a twirl, and approached, arms spread wide. "Hello, friends," he said brightly, as if they hadn't just waded through a charnel house. No, wait. He tapped his forehead several times. Mr. E. That'll do. Short for something." Beam released a fresh cloud of spores. Markin felt them whisper across his mind. Confusion, wariness, deep suspicion. Blue simply crossed his massive arms and glowered. Markin finally found his voice, rough and thin. Who are you?" "Oh, I'm here to help," Mr. E beamed, entirely unaffected by the corpses littering the ground. "At least I think I am." He peered at Markin, frowning slightly, as if measuring him against some invisible memory. "You," Mr. E said, pointing a finger at Markin like a weapon. "You are very important, probably. Possibly? Definitely maybe." Markin wanted to scream, wanted to run. Instead, he stared at the bloody field, at Eliza's twisted body, at Ulrich's wide, dead eyes, and swallowed his fear. If he fled now, he would likely die alone. Instead, he clenched his jaw and nodded, feeling something heavy settle in his chest, a weight that would never quite leave him again. The boy he'd been this morning had died in the mud alongside Aldrich and Eliza. Whatever he was now, whatever he would become, it started here, standing ankle-deep in blood beside a monster of roots, a broken minotaur, and an old madman. Chapter 2. The dead were not yet cold when they moved on. Markin knelt beside Eliza's broken form, head bowed, his tears dropping onto her braid in the mud. Her throat had been torn open, the wound ragged and steaming in the cold air. For a moment, He thought he should close her eyes. For respect. For decency. But he found he couldn't touch her. She didn't look like Eliza anymore. Beside her, Aldrich's body looked stiff already, face locked in a rictus of agony. Markin placed 2 arrows across his chest, the only farewell he could offer. They had fought together. They had bled together. They deserved better than to rot in an unmarked ruin. Beam watched without moving, spores drifting around him like dust motes in the weak light. The gnarled creature tilted its head, a shiver running through the vines and bark that made up its body. Markin felt the brush of emotion again. Solemnity, patience, an ancient grief he could not comprehend. Blue stood guard at the tower's edge, axe slung across his back, silent as the dead he guarded. And Mr. E danced. He spun in lazy circles, tracing strange sigils in the air with one long finger, mumbling to himself. The clock hands that spiraled around his wrists ticked backwards in slow, deliberate jerks, each motion accompanied by a faint click, click, click that made Markin's skin crawl. "Are you going to say some word?" Blue asked suddenly. Markin blinked. "Me?" "You're the only one here who looks like he's got anything left to say." Mr. E hummed tunelessly, unconcerned. Beam crouched beside a body, gently covering it with a thick, spreading moss from his cloak. Markin swallowed hard. His throat was raw. He had no prayers, no grand speeches. He rose, pulling the bowstring tight until the wood creaked in protest. "They died standing," he said, voice barely carrying over the cold wind. "They fought when running would have been easier. That's enough." Blue grunted approval. Beam's spores brushed Markin's mind again, a soft thrum of acceptance, of roots digging deep into the earth and finding strength. Mr. E clapped his hands together suddenly, startling them all. "Marvelous," he declared. "Onward, then." "Where?" Markin asked. "Wherever fate drags us," Mr. E chirped, then leaned in, stage whispering. "Preferably somewhere with fewer hobgoblins." Markin looked to Beam and Blue. They didn't respond, but began trudging through the undergrowth together. The path forward led into the forest beyond the tower, a tangled ancient wood known on Kita's maps as the Fell Grove. Rumor said it was cursed. Markin supposed that that was true of most places where people disappeared and didn't come back. The ground turned soft underfoot. The trees closed in like a noose. Shadows pooled thick between the twisted trunks. Hours passed. Markin kept his bow ready, but nothing stirred but crows, fat and black. He didn't know when the exhaustion hit him. It crawled up his legs into his spine, numbing his fingers. His muscles screamed. His vision blurred. Blue called a halt by a stream that ran sluggish and red with clay. Beam settled at the water's edge, bugs scurrying through his tangled form to drink. His cloak of moss flowed outward, curling tendrils dipping into the soil, leaching some unseen sustenance. Mr. E produced a flask from nowhere and took a deep pull, grimacing. Tastes like regret," he muttered. Or is it love? Hard to tell." Markin dropped to a knee, too tired to care. "You've seen battle before," Blue said after a long silence, his gaze heavy on Markin. Markin nodded. "Not like that." Beam's spores whispered sorrow. Markin caught a flash. Not words, but images. A sunlit glade, charred black, roots severed, and bleeding sap. A memory, perhaps, or a warning. "You fought well," Blue said gruffly. Markin let out a short, bitter laugh. "I froze." "You lived." Beam's spores pulsed in agreement. Mr. E twirled a finger idly in the air, tugging at invisible strings. "You have the look," he mused aloud, "of someone with potential. Seeds need breaking before they can grow." Markin looked at his raw, dirt-caked hands, the grime under his nails, the blood that wasn't all his own. "Don't feel much like growing," he muttered. Mr. E leaned close, so close Markin could smell the metallic tang of magic on him. "Neither does a wound, but it still scabs." They camped that night in a hollow beneath a massive, half-dead oak. Blue took first watch. Beam entwined himself with the tree, vanishing into it so completely that only the faint stir of insects marked his presence. Mr. E muttered in his sleep, snippets of broken prophecy and half-remembered numbers. Markin lay staring up at the black sky, the stars cold and distant. He thought of Aldrich, of Eliza, of the hundreds like them who never came home. He had come to Kita with dreams of citizenship, a better life, a warm hearth, family. He had not realized how much blood those dreams would cost, and somewhere deep inside, a seed did break, and it did begin to grow. The next morning, the forest seemed to swallow them, seemingly growing thicker with each pace. Markin stumbled along the half-formed trail, boots slipping in the muck, the trees knitting tighter overhead. The light barely made it through the canopy now, leaving the world painted in shades of gray and rot. Every shadow was a threat, every sound a whispered warning. Behind him, Beam moved like a ghost, feet silent, spores hissing softly in his wake. Ahead, Blue trudged through the undergrowth, broad shoulders hunched, his massive axe slung across his back. Mr. E, somehow clean despite the carnage they'd left behind, skipped from stone to root with manic energy, humming tunelessly under his breath. Markin's throat burned from the cold air. His legs ached. His mind? He didn't even know what to call what was happening to his mind. It felt loose, like a fraying rope. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Aldrich's mouth working soundlessly, Eliza's scream swallowed by the clash of steel. He should go back. He should bury them. He should find a way home. But every instinct screamed that turning back alone was death, and so he followed. They crossed a crumbling bridge over a stream blackened with peat. Vultures circled far overhead. Their familiar sight made him uneasy today. Somewhere deep in the woods, something howled once, then went silent. Markin finally summoned the nerve to speak. "Where are we going?" Blue didn't turn. His voice rumbled low, barely carrying over the sound of their footfalls. "Not far. There's more of them." Markin stumbled, nearly slipping into the mire. "More? I thought that was the camp. It looked like a whole warband." Blue growled, deep and rough. "That was their scouts. Front line. I saw the markings. The warlord's not dead." "And we're chasing the rest of them because what?" Markin asked. "Revenge?" Blue stopped walking, turned. His massive frame loomed over Markin, the Minotaur's horns catching what little light filtered through the trees. His dark eyes held no softness. "They have a debt," Blue said simply. "One paid in blood." Markin swallowed. Beam stepped closer, laying a hand of woven bark and vine on Blue's arm. The spores that drifted off him spoke clearer than words. A long memory, a wound never healed, a promise made and never fulfilled. Markin exhaled shakily. "You two, you're not just passing through, are you?" "No," Blue said. We came hunting. Markin rubbed a hand over his face. His skin felt foreign, stretched, too tight. He could go back, sure. Back through the woods, alone. Back to Kita. Assuming he could even find the roads. Assuming he didn't starve, or freeze, or bleed out from some man or beast. And if he did make it, back to a broken guild, missing half its members, back to the same stairs, the same judgments, the same failure. No, not yet. He would see this through, at least until there was a real road to walk, real safety to be had. After that, he could figure out what pieces were left to pick up. Markin adjusted the strap of his quiver and nodded, more to himself than to the others. His voice was hoarse, but steady when he spoke. I'm fine. But if we're doing this, we do it carefully. I'm not dying in a ditch today. Blue gave a low grunt of approval. Beam released another spore cloud that tasted of agreement. Mr. E clapped his hands together and beamed. Oh, excellent, he chirped. It's always better with more witnesses. Markin scowled, but said nothing. The forest thickened ahead, the trees bending low like conspirators. Somewhere beyond the mist, a warband regrouped, unaware that death was already stalking them. And Markin Treefoot, for the second time now, in his small broken life, stalked with it. Thanks for listening to War Beneath the Roots. If you enjoyed this story so far, consider following or subscribing and leaving a review. Until next time, keep your blade sharp and your fire burning.